Lost Private. We're in Normandy.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 32 of the We're Not Lost Private podcast. I'm your host, Joe Muccia, and I am so glad to welcome our next guest, Mr. Stephen McCloud. For those of you who are not familiar with Stephen's work, he has written a book called Black Dragon, which covers the Fox Company of 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines during World War II, from their stand-up all the way through to the end of the war. I had stumbled upon Stephen in catching a live stream from the National Museum of the Pacific War during their 80th anniversary celebrations of the battle of, or the commemorations of the Battle of Iwo Jima. Now, this happened in February, late February, and luckily, we were able to find some dead time in Stephen's schedule for him to pop on and join us. Welcome, Steve, to the pod. So glad to have you.
Thanks a lot, Joe. Appreciate the invitation.
Oh yeah. I was absolutely floored. And the reason I was floored when I watched your presentation, and this is something that my the pod co-creator and I, Leighton, when we decided to stand up the pod, we wanted to focus on the sorry about that, the average American that served during World War II. And again, as we talked about prior to going live, I don't mean averages to disparage them. Average in that we wanted to talk about stories of people who were at the tactical level of the war. We would contextualize it through the broader campaigns, and then we would examine their participation. And frankly, due to the amazing amount of information that you were presenting, I struggled mentally about how we were going to accomplish that. And then yesterday, as you and I were kind of sussing out how this was going to go, messaging each other, you said, I want to make this about the Marines and the company. And to me, that was music to my ears, because as a Marine and as someone who has been exposed over my course of my career, the inner workings of the Marine Corps, I understand it's those junior Marines that drive the Marine Corps.
Mm.
It's those enlisted men and those junior NCOs that are really what makes the Marine Corps go. It makes the Marine Corps special. And I feel like that you got exposed to that over the time that you did your research and that you spoke to these Marines and interviewing them for Black Dragon. Does that sound right?
Well, it is, my interest in this, being a team and leadership guy all these years and all this stuff, is how'd they make stuff work? When you're looking from the outside in, you sort of see the X's and O's on the board and the diagrams and the strategies and all this kind of stuff. None of that creates action. None of that confronts the enemy, goes and finds them and in the rocks where they can't even see each other, and they go find the enemy. What makes that work? How in the world does that get done? How do they view each other? How do they think? What organizationally, what do they have? Who are they as a team? Who do they respect and have the highest respect for? That's where my interest lay. And to get that, when you're studying a team, you know this. Every team has its own flavor, its own personality, and to use some of the leadership dictums that we use all the time: show me a team, I'll know its leader. Show me the leader, I'll know the team or the organization. So it takes time. And I was very fortunate over a lot of years, and we'll get to that. We'll stomp all over any linear discussion here. We'll just topics. Fortunate to spend a lot of years with these guys. Now, back in the day, in the mid-90s, when I was starting to look around, after a lot of years of studying Pacific history and Far Eastern history, all around China and the turn of the century and the early naval wars and naval doctrine and all this stuff, and how we ended up in the Pacific, and started looking around for veteran units to go visit. And that included fighter squadrons, Marine fighter squadron, paratroopers, 11th Airborne dudes. These are some hard dudes, buddy. I'm telling you, hard like woodpecker lips, as my brother-in-law said. Good, just good, sharp outfits. And found this little reunion by this unit called 2F23, as they listed it in the back of VFW magazine. And so I reached out to the point of contact, who lived over in South Carolina, where that's my home stomping turf. and his name was Irby Hip. He had been a machine gun section leader, and they were having a reunion in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Well, Charleston, excuse me, Charleston, South Carolina. I said, "Shoot, man, what's not to love about this?" And we talked for about an hour and a half, and I knew later he reached out to Jack Sims, who was kind of the company secretary and organizer of things, and he said, "Man, I just talked to this young fella." As Irby said, he knew more about Saipan than I did. It's garbage, but when I told him, I said, "You guys landed just south of Cherincanoa." He goes, "Oh, you know about Cherincanoa?" You know, and just asked a lot of questions. But that's how it began. And I went to visit these guys, and I found very quickly they loved having somebody there to talk to and to share stories with. And you better be light on your feet, because by golly, they're going from the landing beach at Iwo to the cliffs of Saipan to the one right after the next. Make a point, and you got to know what they're talking about, But that just developed very rapidly into a family reunion, and they made me an honorary member of the company. And all the wives were it was a family reunion. These were uncle everybody and aunts practically, But no, there's a point to this, and I'll get to it here, maybe if I don't forget it. I'm very fortunate and glad that when I went there, I wanted to make sure they didn't regret seeing me coming, because they didn't get together to refight the war. They got together to be together, and I needed to be part of that and not a distraction from it. And was very fortunate, again, I'll say, over time, to be part of that. So go play golf and go drinking, go eating, go wherever, visit at home, and just listen. And when I listened, I always had a micro cassette recorder with me. And you're sitting at the table, and here come the guys, and something's going to start. And I would make sure it was visible, because some stories they would tell and some they didn't want told. And I'd put it on the table, everybody would look at it, and then they would keep going. But
I experienced
there is the team dynamic.
I experienced the similar phenomenon with the Easy Company 506 guys.
Yeah.
I never once brought a micro cassette recorder with me to a reunion, but I did take notes, and I would take notes until they got uncomfortable about a particular story, and then I recorded it mentally and would go back and revisit it with them. And then over time, they would become more accepting of me being around for some of those stories. As they got later in life, when they knew they probably wouldn't be around much longer, I think they got much more comfortable in telling those stories, because they felt like the sand in the hourglass was kind of running out, and the statute of limitations on some stuff. And I'm not saying there's a lot of dirty laundry out there. They're just some things that they saw and experienced they didn't really want to open up about. But later on, and I'm sure you experienced something similar to that, but it did evolve a lot like that, a very familial relationship with them. And I still keep in touch with a lot of their families, and as I'm sure you do with the Fox Company family.
Certainly. Yeah. And you get Garnier and Heffron together, or Goody or Buck or any of the guys. And there's an implicit understanding amongst them about things that are off the table.
Yep. And an inherent shorthand how they talk.
Correct. That's right.
And once you get to the point where you understand the shorthand, you're kind of in at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I understand completely what you're talking about, that phenomenon of them being uncomfortable at first, slightly, even though they've accepted you and brought you in. I think being a combat veteran kind of helped me with that, being accepted a little bit more quickly than maybe some other folks, and having been, at the time when I first met them, being freshly back from Iraq, led to a smooth transition into the acceptance, and then later on, just being around them so much that breeds familiarity. And
Well, and there's a similar thread there to the theme that we're talking about here about the guys and about the team and the Marines and that where action is created. I was out at 29 Palms a couple of years ago doing a PME out there, and somebody asked me something along the lines of, "Okay, how do they accept you as just you've never served and all this?" I said, "My job is to get them to see past me immediately. It's not about me." And if I can get them looking past me and seeing the Marines real quick, then I'm fine. But the point is, they want to know if I'm up there thinking it's about me because they know better.
Oh,
Quickest
they
I
can
can
smell
convince
that.
them that, they smell it immediately.
Yep.
And so when you go visit these veterans back in the day, it ain't about me, you know. And once they realize why you're there and what your motive is, and it's the same as anything else, a brand new dude in the unit. Who's this dude? And is he going to go get us all in trouble, or will he listen? You know. So I'm a boot the whole time, right? And they got to school me up. And sure, I brought in those boot mentalities, and I want to hear big, towering stories of a sergeant barking orders on Saipan and or Iwo Jima and getting things done. And I get schooled up that that's not reality. And once I realize and accept that that's reality's not what I want to hear, and what I want to hear may not be reality, then they're more willing to lay it out there. And but
I
there are
lo-
things that they did carry with them. Those black dragons that they carried with them that even amongst themselves they didn't talk about really until it was announced that I was okay. I'm going to attempt to book dadgummit, you know. And all of a sudden, here they came, and they hammered. And well, do you want this guy named? Do you think I should name this guy? And uh, they were at the point where, well, to properly honor this other fellow, yeah, I think we should. Well, once all all these fellows have passed, and by that time, what's there to gain by naming this fellow? Nothing. And so you make those decisions. They would not want him named now, who did something, you know.
yeah, I can think of one
His
instance
family doesn't deserve that, and so forth. Yeah.
in Black Dragon when they were climbing into the tractors, and the one Marine
Mm,
um, went down and said, I think I broke my ankle. You don't
mm,
name him, which is
I don't.
it was. I thought it was very appropriate. I
Well, I'm
mean,
glad.
like you said, what is there to gain at this
What's it
point?
gain? So I
Right?
know who he is, and I know why he did that. And most of the guys didn't know why. And you have to be careful there because, as we're already saying, over years, and you're with these guys and you're recording notes or recordings, and the fellow didn't mean to reveal to you who that was, but telling something else on a different year, he told you who that was. And when you put them together, you know. And when you know, you go, you know what? I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
I know why he did this. I sure do. So, but that's what Hollywood would jump on. Yeah, you
Oh
have it
yeah.
because that's not characteristic of, and you don't understand. And so if they didn't tell it, I ain't telling it. It's so that's also the importance of this book. It's not my book. It's theirs, and just do all you can to embody that team and their values and the way they saw things, their perspective. That's why it's called the Experience of a Marine Rifle Company. I want you to be in part of that company, travel through time, and let's see things the way they did, and go with that. And
Yeah.
that's then in history, we're less able to nitpick and pull out little things out of context and lie about things.
Well, I can tell you, mission accomplished in that regard.
Oh
It
man.
is beautifully written. It takes. I felt like when I was reading the opening chapter for Iwo, not the sailing too, but as they were beginning the assault, when they climbed down in the tractors and then they dropped out into the water, I could almost feel like I could smell the salt in the air
Mm.
from the waves being churned. Um, and I coupled that. I went back and rewatched your presentation with the color footage of them going in, and it's very powerful. Like I really recommend everybody, if you get a chance, to go back and watch the presentation. We're going to kind of do a little bit of it because you have your presentation set up, but we're not going to follow that in kind of linear fashion as we discussed before we went on air. We're going to just work our way through it in a very natural, organic way and talk about the Marines and corpsmen of this company. I also like the fact that you did expand it out at times to talk about the battalion. One of the things I thought was very interesting is your handling of the battalion leadership, especially the transfer or the transition from Dylan to Bob Davidson,
Mm.
especially their leadership styles and
Mhm.
how that was discussed and handled. And I thought, again, very, very adept. He was, I would say, as being a Marine, he was a controversial leader. He was a nitpicker, a pain in the ass. I would not have liked him. He reminds me of my XO from Iraq. Um, and I really appreciated Bob Davidson's more subtle handling of the battalion.
Mm.
And you get that through your writing. So again, mission accomplished, but I'm sure we're gonna get into that as we move along. I mean, we've just been doing the preamble here, and
Yeah, if you remind me of it,
we're
you
already
know, it's
about
all
20 minutes in.
it's all just a discussion of the rifle game. You know, the battalion. I had one Marine say, "Well, because he read the rough draft, and he said, I enjoyed it. There's just one thing it just eats at me." I said, "What's that?" He said, "I wish you hadn't put Dylan in there."
It's
So I
funny.
have to.
I have been writing my own notes down into memoir form, and every time I get to the XO, it's like, and I posted on Facebook, and guys that I was over there with, I have on my feed, and they're reading it, and they're going, "Man, that guy was a pain in the ass." I mean, like I'm like, yeah, well, he is who he is, and I ran into him in Baghdad years later, and he was still the same guy.
Hmm.
He'd never changed. He never learned any lessons. He was still the same guy, and so I felt a little bit vindicated in how I handled him in the narrative. I'm
Sure.
sure, like, these guys would not want you to waste pages and ink on a guy that they did not respect, or at least respect as a person and a Marine, not as an officer. That obviously they're
Mhm.
going to do what good Marines do and Roger that, sir, and move out. But at the end of the day, I also like that you did cover Marine language and nomenclature up front. When I first started reading it, and I looked at 2F23, and I went, well, that's odd, because nowadays the company designation goes first before the battalion.
Mhm.
So that was interesting to see that that's how the boys referred to themselves. Um,
Yeah.
so again, for those of you who are not inculcated into Marine speak, you're going to hear things like the head, scuttlebutt, bulkheads, fore, aft, port, starboard. You're going to hear a lot of nautical language. I apologize. I will try and put a vocabulary or a glossary up for everybody on our Patreon site, so it'll make it a little easier transition from normal human speak to Marine speak and Navy parlance. But with that said, Steve, the floor is all yours. Please, let's talk about these guys.
Oh, well, okay. So I'm going to be a little clunky here. I'm going to share, and then we'll go full screen because there's on the theme that we're talking about here. Let me get back to it. How are we looking, Joe?
Not seeing it yet, but I mean, I think we're
Well,
going to probably be talking about Jack Padley, probably, right?
we are. Let's try this other screen
Talk
then.
about a recruiting poster Marine. Holy cow!
Yeah. How we
This
got?
this guy was the All-American, right?
That's right.
Yeah. So
Uh,
go ahead, please.
yeah. So we're just we're talking about Fox Company, 23rd, 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines, and as you mentioned, Joe, back in those days they called it 2F23. Nobody knew why. I remember in the late 90s, a 6th Marine Division Marine said, "Why do your guys say it backwards?" I said, "They later war, but early war, in fact, pre-war, even the 6th Marines and stuff, where some of these guys came from, that came with them. They were already doing it." I love also the story. I was talking to the legendary National Park Service historian Ed Barrs about this. He was here in town, and I was with the chief historian Jim Ogden of Chickamauga, Chattanooga battlefield. But anyway, we're having dinner, and I mentioned this. I said some folks have the difficult time understanding that they did this. He said, "Well, the way we did it in 3L7 was, he just did the same exact thing." And so we laughed at that. So early war, that I don't know where it started, but that's where it came from. And it's kind of like when they formed the fire team. The Marine Corps wanted it called a team. 4th Marine Division always called it a group because they called it that from the beginning, and they stuck with it.
Yeah, very interesting. And by the way, I did serve in 4th Marine Division for some of my reserve time. I was in 4th Marine Division, so this is also near and dear to my heart.
Red Diamond, that's outstanding. That was just a storied division, and it's good to see them still
Get some
have.
recognition, right?
You bet, you bet. Now this thing, I took the company photograph, and there's a lot sometimes that I'll talk about this, but you're talking about average Americans, typical American boys. When the company was formed in July 42, there was only 9 Marines there that day, but the first ones that came in were folks who'd been in there for a while, and there weren't that many of them. And then in October 42, you start seeing these high schoolers showing up because their parents made them wait till they finished high school and all this. And that's now you've got some old salty China Marines and some guys who've been in there for a while, and they got to bring in all these high schoolers into their Marine Corps all of a sudden and train them up. And I won't show a photo of this, but it's interesting to see photographs of some of the guys who became the real leaders in this company. Platoon Sergeant Leo Kelly. Well, I've got pictures of him over in what at the time Camp New River, Camp Lejeune, and he's standing around, and you see these guys taking pictures, and they're high schoolers playing Army.
By the way, you said Camp Lejeune like a local. Love it. Spent many years at Camp Swampy.
There you go. Well, it's interesting to see them from playing Army over there, in these new uniforms they've got, and after they've been through a couple operations, and they look, well, salty is overused term, but some hard dudes, and you see them mature greatly. But Jack Padley, you mentioned, he comes in the spring of 43 when the 23rd Marines is split in half. In fact, the next day, when the regiment split in half to form the 25th Marines. 24th is on the West Coast at that time. And so the rifle companies were split in half, and so down goes the company in size. But Jack came in at that point and took command of the company. And as you mentioned, yeah, he was a all-star halfback from Dayton University, put them on the map, the Dayton Flyers. Not a big fellow, but fast, very quick. And I would point out, because we're talking about the nature of this organization, the team and the culture and that kind of thing. The correspondents up there in the newspapers in Dayton always said, he was not a great interview. It was a lot of yups, yes sir, no sir, that kind of stuff. I just did not have time for much attention. Wasn't interested in it. And he brought that to Fox Company. So guess what Fox Company's personality is as a team? There's no shine, no real luster, gleam. It's just all business. And they didn't want attention and all that. So back to that phrase, show me a leader, I'll know the organization. Show me the organization, I'll know its leader. This is absolutely Jack Padley is Fox Company's personality and vice versa.
That happens to this day. That's still a trait, even down to the fire team level. The Marines in that small unit and the corpsmen will take on, I won't say the personality of, but sometimes personality traits, mannerisms, things of that nature. If a very popular and adept leader wears his gear a certain way, you'll see a lot of the Marines wearing their gear the same way, as long as it fits within the Marine Corps' need and love for uniformity. You'll see that happen. So it's definitely something that continues to this day, and I think it's part of the lifeblood of the Marine Corps.
Not to sidebar too far here, but I'll put some other terminology to it to help to explain why. In our leadership programs, we say many times, what gets measured gets done, and what gets rewarded gets repeated. Well, this leader measured things certain ways, right? And et cetera. And that becomes the norm. What's the accepted way of doing things, the accepted way of thinking and just carrying on day-to-day operations, certainly in combat. And he sets the tone, leading by example. And when they were training, Gunny Douglas, who was 5'6", from Lubbock, Texas, but he was a quick little son of a gun. And Jack, being the athlete, Jack would always do the obstacle courses. Everybody else did. He'd be the last one through, and Gunny would go with him. And he said, Jack was surprised I could hang with him, going through there. But and all these Marines would tell you, anything we did, Jack was right there. He did not have a lot to say. Now, he would get up there and he would order, but he was not a showman. And that shows itself in the company in a lot of ways, including, I think, their casualties and how they incur those casualties or don't. A lot of that is supposition on my part, but his leadership, it's very much Dick Winters. Dick was business, didn't want attention, looked after his guys. It was just superb. And the first sergeant in the book, you'll see when you finish Saipan, if you those have not read Black Dragon, I finally got an interview with the first sergeant, Jim Hudson. In this photograph, he's in the far right. And this correspondent who had been up in Dayton interviewing Padley in the college days comes in there, and Padley's in a meeting, and Hudson's giving this correspondent what for, you know. And he starts talking about him. He's just saying he's done an outstanding job. You understand? He's just nothing but business. Nothing that didn't need to be done. You understand? You know, this terminology, this language you would recognize today in Marines. And to me, I read it. He's saying he never did and never had us do things we didn't need to be doing. And it's just an outstanding interview. So that trait runs throughout the company. Now, we're talking about wartime here, World War II, and all the inculcation of all these guys coming in from all over the place. Sitting just to the right of Jack Padley there, the tall fellow, John Radway, was out of Harvard University. Some sharp fellows here. As a Marine, there's one thing in this photo that I bet stands out to you. What is it, Joe?
Somebody's wearing white socks.
White socks. One of the officers, nonetheless.
Yeah. That jumped right out. I was like, oh man, what happened there?
Doing a big PME out there, and with the drill instructors or whoever's out there at 29 Palms. All right, what do you see? And you hear it, white socks. You yelled out. It's funny. That's Lieutenant Charlie Ahern.
Yeah. Ends up being the XO, yeah.
From Boston. And he is one of the most beloved long-term officers, stays with the battalion. He has to serve up with Dillon as his adjutant far too long. Hates his guts.
Those are some interesting stories in there about him having to survive Lieutenant Colonel Dillon.
Oh my gosh, yeah, it's incredible. But at the same time, now here's a fellow who's joined up because the war is on, and he couldn't care less about formalities, and he's got a job to do. Now, I don't know that Charlie did this on purpose, wore white socks, but it wouldn't surprise me that he did. And if you look at Jack's expression, and even Jim Hudson's expression, the little grin on his face, I wouldn't be surprised. I could hear Jack going, geez, Charlie, you know. But that's him. And one thing you'll note on Saipan, when they get up there in the mop-up phase and they've got to clear caves, what do you read? The guy's saying, you know what? The one officer, the only officer I ever saw going to caves with us was Charlie Ahern, clearing caves. And by golly, on Iwo Jima, when it reaches its apex at Iwo Jima, he goes in as the company executive officer under Larry Snowden, who's the captain at that time. And when Larry's evacuated, Charlie takes command of that company, promoted to captain. And his leadership at the decisive moment, and I wrote an article on this for the Gazette, Marine Corps Gazette, about the battle for coordination, which was the Battle of Iwo Jima. And there's his decisive leadership at the decisive moment makes all the difference in the world there. Highly respected, wearing white socks. So we got to be careful what we measure, right?
Yeah.
Et cetera. Just
like I said, the almost maniacal desire for uniformity on the part of the Marine Corps, this must have driven a lot of senior officers to drink heavily.
Well, it's an indicator also, and the point I'd go back to making here is these guys were joined up during the war. This is a bunch of average Joe Americans, over 16 million of them, joining to go win the war and go home, go back to their wives or girlfriends or families or whatever.
If my memory is not too sour, I recall hearing that the average age of the Marine in World War II was younger than the Army. Is that correct? Am I off base, or is that correct?
Couldn't tell you.
Okay.
I'm not familiar.
From reading the book, there were so many young guys, and one of them was 15 or 16.
Oh, sure, Jack Lucas.
Yeah, I mean, some of these fellas are, they're young teenagers, not 18, 19, although there was plenty of them. I can't imagine, like, I joined the Marine Corps late. I joined at 21, and I thought I was fairly well equipped, especially to survive boot camp, because I had a little bit more bark on my skin than some of my fellow trainees, my fellow recruits. I can't imagine being just like 16 years old and going, especially with a global war going on. But then again, different time, different place, different mentality, different people.
Well, that's right. this slide may do some crazy things, but I'll show it here. You got to get to know the guys, right? So,
Right.
and their personalities, and including, I love the photo there. That's Slim Gardner, the tallest fellow in the company, and Mike Mauricio, the shortest guy in the company. And some funny stories between those guys. And you can always count on Gardner, Slim Gardner, for some sly little dull humor in the midst of whatever's going on. But those are part of those dynamics as well. And then these guys like kneeling up front on the right is Jack Sims and Roy Stewart on the left, and those are two replacements that came in. This two S's alphabetically, through training together, and they come out as replacements and join Fox Company on Iwo Jima, and they're Fox Go whole buddies every night except for one, that last night when the Japanese launched the counterattack. But if you want to get a proper feel for things, don't separate these guys and interview them individually. You get them together and stay together and find out what that was like. That's where the money is. That's where the value is. The corpsman, you mentioned the corpsman, and I would tell you this was instructive for me. My first visit with Fox Company, the first name they mentioned was not a Marine. First thing I heard was, it's too bad you didn't get to meet Doc Bankin, Owen H. Bankin. Well, I knew enough to say, yeah, that would have been nice, and I'm sure he knew a lot. I had no clue what they were really saying there at that time.
Or Devil Doc.
Unbelievable. This fellow is just incredible. He's not in this photograph. And in fact, he's in none of the corpsman photographs because he's always with the Marines.
I was going to say, he's down with the company. He's down with his platoons and his squads and his fire teams.
He stayed with them. There's a lot to discuss there that's interesting. But by this time, this photograph was taken on the 4th of July of 45 after Iwo Jima. And these fellows have been awarded their medals. And that's why this photo exists outside sick bay at the top of the hill. But Doc was already back. He was in the hospital, so he was back in St. Albans, New York at this time. But getting to know those guys is important. As you know, this is a Marine. If you don't get to know those, you don't understand what's making things work. This document in there, as you were pointing out, 2F23. Well, this is May of 1945, and it's still being done, typed up on official records. So sometimes I've got to pull that out and let people know. I thought, Joe, real quick, because we'd like to talk about Iwo Jima if we ever get there.
Yeah.
And the Marianas, Saipan and Tinian. This is they're gone for 150 days or something, you might say. Sailing out to Saipan on an LST, all crammed in there, miserable. And then having to mop up northern Saipan, which was also miserable. Especially on the psych end of things, having to clear caves, and civilians are in there and you can't get them separated.
Yep.
But and then Tinian, and they're mostly sick on Tinian with dysentery and dengue fever and all of that, those who are left. So, but what they came away from the Marianas with is a lot of experience, and a lot of experience with the Japanese as defenders and as soldiers. Now, it must also be said that the Japanese on Saipan and Tinian were in great disorder. And our submarines had really done their job well. So most of them let's just say, undersupplied. You've got Japanese.
Yeah, I'd say the interdiction of the sea lanes for the Japanese resupply, just tremendous work out there by the submariners.
That's exactly right. And there was not a single, and I'm going to say that as I recall it, in the Marine reports, of all the scores of defensive positions, fixed positions, none of them were completed ever. A great many of them were still in the progress, but they couldn't get rebar, and the concrete, you name it, everything they needed.
Yeah. And
then thanks to Admiral Nimitz, and thanks to a lot of other things, but his decisiveness, we're on Saipan months ahead of time. So it has to be said, the Japanese were unprepared really to defend that island. There was a bunch of them on there, and they did certain things, but it was a grind for the Marines. The worst for the Marines was the first 2 days when they ran into the Japanese artillery and mortar fire at the crust defense around the landing. That was the worst part of the battle. That's where most of the casualties were suffered by them. But some of the lessons learned, they dealt with a lot of terrain, very rugged terrain where you couldn't find the source of enemy fire.
Canalized as well.
Very much, very much.
Yep.
They came away with a great deal of experience working as the tank infantry team, trying to. You still have a different mindset about that, than what will matter on Iwo Jima. You still have, you're fighting some folks who think coordination is a diagram you draw on the board. It's a formation, right? And we achieved that. Look, we did. Oh, we got it. Congratulations. Maybe one more time in history will you be able to do that. But
Because nothing survives that first contact.
that's it. But they did see how, and I would say really the value of doing that when you've got what I'm talking about is the tanks out front moving across an open plain, infantry behind them, half tracks in there as well. They're all mutually supporting, and you're creating that combined arms look where the enemy's got a dilemma to deal with, and that's great. That's not going to happen on Iwo Jima. There's the term,
Yeah,
wow. But the value there is that we have in our minds and our psyches, we are supposed to be together as one.
yeah, I think one of the things that I really enjoyed was how you covered the change in tactics from campaign to campaign, how the Marines take their lessons learned and they evolve their tactics to fit the next fight, especially in their table of organization when they start. At first, they have their engineers embedded, and then they say, hey, listen, we need to train the average Marine to do these things in case engineers are not available. But it's always with the mindset of we're going to be together and operating as a team. And that's evolved into the MAGTAF concept that we use today, Marine Air Ground Task Force, which makes every Marine unit that goes out, and this is the basis of a battalion landing team these days, and I'm sure you're going to talk about this a little bit, but contextualize it for World War II. These days, when you'll see references to Marine units as BLTs, not bacon, lettuce, and tomato, but battalion landing team, where a battalion is the central piece. And this is what we learned from boot camp on out. Every MOS in the Marine Corps is designed to support the infantry, the 03 infantry. Every MOS supports that Marine rifle unit, whether it's a fire team, squad, platoon, or company, battalion, is the point element for the entire Marine Corps at that point in time. And everything exists to support it. In this case, we see the evolution of Marine composition and how they put together units for a particular action. And there's all the specialties will be represented. But I loved how you described the embedding of flamethrower elements, the demolition teams, engineers to do not only to do sapper-like missions, but also to do the, implanting mines or displacing mines that have been in place, or the construction of bridges or fortifications. I mean, you have all these elements baked in there, and I want to say the disbandment of the weapons company and the pushing down of the mortars and machine guns into the rifle companies. So if I've overstepped or outrun their headlights on the discussion, I apologize, but I just felt it's necessary to say that we see this beginning of this evolution here in World War II, and it's carried on all the way up and influenced how the Marine Corps operates today.
Bingo. And you know what they're doing? They're after this, if we define it this way, that's what all that adaptation between one operation and the next and throughout training and all this, and it doesn't align. It's inconvenient when things happen and a reorganization comes down, and the transference of the assault demolitions. These guys are on a ship practically going to Saipan when this happens. It's just got to happen, and it's not. They're not waiting around saying, "Well, these guys are about to get on a boat. We'll wait till later." It's just the way it is. It's wartime, but that adaptation is all trying to get to the point where the right thing happens the right way at the right time, regardless whose responsibility it is. And when we're fighting so hard to define team by that, with engineers doing this, and you guys do this, and you guys doing this. Wait a minute, we're siloing these guys, trying to hammer together instead of organizing and making this an organic function of a team, so that stopwatch runs shorter. OODA loops and all this other stuff we're talking about. So they're concentrating effort. Let's see ourselves now as an assault unit. We're not just an infantry unit that's going to move in and occupy ground after artillery has flattened it. We're going in, we got to dig out the enemy. We've got to find them, and we've got to have every capability necessary to make it happen immediately.
But it'll all boil down to that 4-man team that we discussed.
It is.
It's that corporal or that senior PFC, 2 riflemen, a BAR man. That's that fire team, or in this case, as the Fox Company men referred to it as, that group of 4 is the building block of everything for the Marine Corps.
It very much is. Let's try to get there in a few. It's going to be important for Iwo Jima. Tank infantry team. So we're trying to figure out what team means, and that's evolving through a year, year and a half. Very difficult to figure out what team means and how do we get there. It's not just a culture. That's my point here. It takes work and effort and
To operationalize it. Yeah.
absolutely, to turn it into a real methodology. They had to clear caves, as I mentioned. It's important in the Marianas. They did deal with civilians. They did not on Iwo Jima. Let's jump down to leadership and teams in early 44. Now we've reorganized the Marine Corps, triangularized the Marine Corps, but created the 4-man fire team. This is March of 44. The division already started in February doing this. And that you take a 13-man squad with a leader and you say that's not going to get things done in the Pacific. And that our leaders in Guadalcanal had figured that out. Mm-hmm. And said we needed to focus on smaller teams. And so they created the 4-man fire team, divided that squad into threes. Once again, one leader with 3 subordinates to communicate with. So now you got 4 decision makers in a squad. You got a sergeant, we'll say, and 3 corporals. And that's great. Fantastic. You got flexibility. No, you do not. You got chaos because they've never done it before. So again, what does team look like and how do you get there? So throughout the spring of 44, they've got to work on making that work and then work on making it work well, getting good at it. And so this time on Saipan also enhanced the learning curve there, or enhanced the learning lessons there, and what a team really looks like, and how to work together as one. And then leadership continued to advance. But I'm showing you a Japanese Type 92 weapon there, and another one here. Lessons learned about the Japanese. Only in one occasion, I think in the 4th Marine Division case, did they find that the Japanese used interlocking fire with machine guns. It would be one weapon in a position firing down a lane. Positions along the beach. They said this guy might be firing an anti-boat weapon here. If you could get around him and assault from the rear, he'd make no attempt to defend himself. He'd just keep pulling that trigger. Their artillery. Big lesson here. General Snowden brought this to my attention in 97. And he said it this way. He said, I'm very, very fortunate at Saipan that the Japanese did not know how to use their artillery effectively, or I probably wouldn't be here.
Uncoordinated.
I thought, well, that's nuts because they pounded the dickens. And he said, firing a lot of rounds and massing fires, coordinating fires, 2 completely different things.
They fired a lot of searching fires. They would just run it back and forth to the beach and inland without coordinating and having overlapping fires, having it focused on fire sacks where they had positions like the roadways that you adeptly describe in Black Dragon, where we knew the tanks and the half tracks would have to come up because the ground couldn't support them. That's where you have to focus your fire. And it was very effective in that there was massed fires and they knew where the Americans were going to be and they could fire it, but they didn't know how to coordinate it effectively. And I'm sure that that's what the general was talking about.
That's exactly right. And even the thing about Rommel, he who defends everywhere defends nowhere.
Yeah.
And so the Japanese did set up grids, and they would assign a grid to one weapon and have an observer there, and that's where you fired. And I make a point to highlight it in the book that one of the correspondents, Robert Sherrod, said, they fired rounds all night in the lagoon. There's nothing out there. But by golly, that gunner was doing his job, and they're doing a good job of it because what's getting measured? How many rounds you
keeping up that rate of fire.
So how wasteful of ammunition, which is very heavy, and they didn't have prime movers, so there's the most expensive way to use your assets and least effective.
And again, we talked about their lack of or hardly being resupplied. I mean, every one of those rounds is worth its weight in gold, and they're just throwing them away needlessly.
And so this photograph here, I always use in PMEs. 2 guns within 50 feet of each other, firing on completely different azimuths. And no way could they concentrate fire on it. They're prohibited from doing so. Now you talk about operating in silos and et cetera. So this is one of the big lessons also that the Marines took away from the Japanese. And that's just facts of life for the Japanese. They did not concentrate their fire in any meaningful way. Even their tank attacks, you launched 44 tanks in a night attack against the 2nd Marine Division and accomplished nothing because it wasn't coordinated with infantry, et cetera. So there were a lot of lessons that came out of the Marianas that these guys brought to Iwo Jima. Now, since we're going to talk about Iwo and talk about the rifle company, let's put it in context. And I sat out in Texas for the National Museum there. You know, we take the bait oftentimes of thinking, well, that was a foregone conclusion. We just look how massive our force was, and some of the grand imagery certainly plays into that. But when you get into Iwo Jima, in fact, 2 minutes into Iwo Jima, that's undone completely. And
Yeah, it's a whole different ball game. Especially again, we were in reading that opening chapter of Iwo when they try to land the tanks, and I'm sure you'll discuss that
you
as we
bet.
go forward. You're not just fighting the enemy; you're fighting terrain here.
Absolutely. And the Japanese did a masterful job of using that to working together. So it wasn't anything grand by the time you get into the meat of Iwo Jima. It was down to this 4-man fire team we're talking about.
Yep.
And so that was a big point that I made there. The planning, you're landing 2 Marine divisions side by side, 5th Marine Division landing on 3 beaches, green and red 1 and 2, and then the 4th Marine Division landing on yellow 1 and 2 and blue 1. And so really you've got 6 BLTs, but there's also a half of BLT landing on the far right coming in as well. Each battalion landing team is 3 rifle companies and a headquarters company. And so you're going to put 2 up and 1 back in the landing, two rifle companies each. And then your reserve or your support rifle company coming in after them with your headquarters company. And that battalion landing team is the tip of the spear. I mean, and they loaded this thing up. And I'm telling you, 223, 2nd Battalion, 23rd, did all they could. They brought the hammer to Iwo Jima.
Yeah.
They really did. With the rocket Jeep now they've got that Buck Finney's using with his 81 millimeter mortars.
Yeah.
They were impressed with its ability to thicken an artillery preparation on Saipan. So this was good stuff. And they're bringing everything, all their assault capabilities and everything to Iwo Jima. But we'll see what happens to that shortly here. The objective for the first day for the assault was the 01 line, pass. You know, you're cutting off Mount Suribachi, overrunning the first airfield and working up to the second airfield. Pretty optimistic. And we talk a little bit about 2nd Battalion here and the BLT, and you mentioned Bob Davidson. There he is, one of these young, brilliant young fellows. Shelton Scales was his buddy. He was in 3rd Battalion, and those two were just, I love talking to Gunny Douglas about him. Just how intelligent these guys were, and kind of easygoing, to your point, as a contrast to what they'd seen before. But your 3, and then Jack Padley, who had commanded Fox Company, now is Battalion XO, and your 3 company commanders, E companies, commanded by Major Lester Faught, who came in on Saipan when it was so bad. Easy Company was decimated, and they lost all their officers, lost all their senior NCOs. He came down from battalion and took over. He had dengue fever on Tinian, so he wasn't able to command the company there really. But so he's Easy Company. G Company is Carl O.J. Gus Grusendorf. That's the reserve company coming in, and Fox Company now commanded by Larry Snowden, who was later Lieutenant General. Larry Snowden, Assistant Commandant Marine Corps. But they're coming in. I wanted to highlight this for us as well. I'll show just a little footage, but I'm not trying to run that through Zoom today. It's important for us to see what was in front of the landing ways at Iwo Jima. You can see Yellow Beach 1 and 2 there, but on that first line of vessels that we see indicated up there on the right and the left, on either side, there are 5 LCS gunships, and in the middle, there's a dozen LCI gunships, all that are supposed to be launching rocket barrages, use at 40 millimeters and all that stuff to put fire on the beach just before the landing craft get there. Well, that middle 12 LCIs, they supported the underwater demolition teams 2 days earlier and got hit very hard, to say the least. So they're not participating at all in the D-Day operations. So instead of 22 gunships up there, you've got 10 who spread out those LCSs.
That's a heck of a reduction in firepower being put on the beaches at that point.
Very much. And who knows what it would have done, right on the beach. There weren't many Japanese on the beach. It was mostly a big target zone. But this little cutaway of Yellow Beach 2, I like to use to show that these landing beaches 500 yards wide. You got your 2 rifle companies coming in, the Fox Company on the right. We also, in red, I'm showing two blockhouses that are indicated both on maps and aerial photographs and figure into the experience of Fox Company, certainly. But I also point out on Saipan, the depth of your beach is maybe 5 yards at most. By the time you get off the water through the trees, and now you're inland. And in the Marshall Islands, similar. But here, the beach is a good 735 yards deep all the way to the airfield, which, by the way, is 200 feet in elevation. So just
Yeah.
on a smooth road in your favorite walking shoes, climb a 9% grade without anybody shooting at you, and you'll be catching your breath, but by the time you get to the top. But when Fox Company lands, and E Company on the Yellow 2, I use this photo. It's not them, but it does show a high embankment. And they did on the right side of Yellow 2 have a very tall embankment up maybe 15, 16 feet high. And now Mr. White Sox, who was First Lieutenant Charlie Ahern, who was the company XO, has landed right in the middle. The rifle companies in their first wave, they landed in two waves. You put two platoons in the front, first wave, and then your support platoon coming in the second wave. Each platoon in that wave is in 3 Amtraks, right and left. And they put a 7th Amtrak in the middle with the company executive officer in there. And that's Charlie. And he said, well, yeah, lucky me. Iwo Jima decided to send me in the first wave. But he landed and said, well, it's only light small arms fire. And in fact, in some of the correspondence recordings, you listen to them, you can make out individual machine guns out there. There's not a din of fire. You can hear the American BAR or 30 cal, but you'll hear individual Japanese machine guns as well. So the problem was they landed just beneath a blockhouse. And Charlie looked up at this thing. This is it a few days later after it's been uncovered. 2 levels. Had an anti-boat gun on the lower level and 25 millimeter on the top, and it's firing, as I indicated on that cutaway map. It's exchanging crossfire with a blockhouse another 200 yards to the left, and that's firing straight across 2nd platoon.
That's a massive kill zone.
Massive kill zone,
And that's where they lose Kelly, right?
That's Leo Kelly, Platoon Sergeant Kelly, hard charger. And with all this experience, he's going to get the company into the fight and crawls over the embankment, and that 25 millimeter hit him immediately.
And I can't tell you
Go ahead, Joe.
what that does to the psyche of a unit. And this is why I was so impressed with Fox Company, despite losing Kelly, who was a long-standing member of the company and extremely popular and very tactically and technically proficient. It could have crippled a lesser unit, right? But they managed to rally despite the loss of Kelly, and that's a tribute to him and the Marines and Foreman and Fox Company.
I would certainly agree. It's an interesting. You mentioned how the company kept going, and because of that experience, I'll use a little footage here, which may work for us in YouTube or in Zoom. They couldn't do anything about that blockhouse at first because the flamethrowers were not in the first wave with them. They're coming in the second wave in LVT-4s. Each company landed with 2 LVT-4s, and that had a ramp in the back, so the guy could run out instead of jump over the side. This footage is actually Fox Company hitting the beach, and this is the second wave joining the first on Yellow 2 on the right side. You can see how tall the embankment is.
I also thought it was very interesting that you pointed out about the assault Amtraks going in first with the 75 millimeters. And there's a picture of one that's completely grounded in the black, the black sand, and tilted to a point where it can't even utilize its gun to support the Marines. It was very, very interesting to see that. I mean, I've never set foot on Iwo. I was in Oki for a little bit and never got a chance to head over. But I do have some jars of sand from Iwo, and I could understand how you can't get traction and you can't gain ground. And this will affect when the 4th Tank Battalion comes in later on.
It does nothing. There's no binders or binding or whatever in that grit, so it does nothing to help you. It just absorbs all your energy. Even so, if you're a vehicle or if you're a human, grinding your feet into this thing.
Oh, man, trying to work your way up those terraces in that. It's just mind-boggling how they were able to push up. I mean, and you cover it in the book too. They spend a lot of time on ship, and there's not a lot of time. You can do calisthenics and you can do some physical activity, but it's not the same as say when they were back in Maui and they were able to PT in a normal way to keep their endurance and their cardio up, and they didn't have that opportunity on the boat. So they're a little uh, there's a little bit of atrophy setting in terms of their physical conditioning.
Absolutely. Um, you match that with the adrenaline and the exhaustion once you get into combat. You know how your thirst gets magnified and everything else. So just every few yards is a mountain of work, just physically, much less psychologically. But I love this still shot here because I can see the profile of that blockhouse there.
Yep. A slight rise coming up off of it. You can
That's
see
right. And
that little
Charlie
black
Hearn,
line going up and down.
there we go. And Charlie Hearn right in front of it.
Yeah.
Probably, well, Larry Snowden's coming in right behind him, might have joined by this time. We see, the second wave is clawing up there. Another thing I always point out significantly, and you mentioned Don Swindle. Oh, there's Hearn's position. Don Swindle, a veteran of Saipan and Tinian, but he had survived that barrage at Saipan and knew you got to get off the beach and inland because they're firing along that belt around the beach.
Yep.
And so the first thing you got to do is get inland. And our failure at Saipan, the reason we were subjected to that is because we weren't successful in riding those Amtraks all the way inland and to the 01 line. And we dumped our guys out right in the bullseye with that artillery.
Right in the kill zone.
It wouldn't have, otherwise wouldn't happen that way, presumably. We'll just say that way. So as the second wave comes in, that third platoon, literally in this case, third platoon, comes in as well. And Don Swindle said that company was held up by something on the left. He didn't know what it was, didn't care. And also you'll notice in footage, we see a couple other companies land as well, but they do land in clusters, even though they're supposed to be spreading out.
Spread out, yep.
The Amtraks do land them in clusters. Third platoon's coming in and they're immediately fanning out, spreading out this frontage and getting away from that.
It's funny. Don and his assistant gunner basically outpace everybody and find themselves
they do
well out in front of the line.
no time to wait. So off they go. And they get several hundred yards inland before the Japanese, because there's a long delay before the Japanese are content that there's enough Marines on the island now that we're going to open up with everything we've got.
Yeah, they want to make sure they're committed to the landing and they're entrenched into it, and before they start firing.
That's right.
And it makes complete sense. You want to mass your fires, and you want to make sure you're massing it on masses of troops. So why wait until those initial waves are in? Why don't you wait till the second and third waves come in and you have a substantial amount of Marines on the beach before you start opening fire? Completely makes sense.
Very, very much. In this photograph, we see Yellow 2 looking from probably between the boundary of Easy Company and Fox Company on Yellow 2 looking towards Suribachi. And these guys moving in. This is still morning, but it's a little later in the morning, probably.
The ditch to the upper right.
Ditch to the upper right. It's interesting when you read, the guys would tell you that Doc Bankin, when he was dragging back casualties, and they said it was one big ditch. He had a lot of Marines in there. I don't know if that's it, but could well be Doc Bankin's ditch where he's getting.
Well, they're not up and advancing, and many of them don't look like they're orienting their weapons inland.
Yeah,
so
this is it looks to me very much like it. Nobody else is going to do that. That's too good a target.
It's quite possibly a casualty collection point.
I think I would agree. Just a few minutes after 10 o'clock, now headquarters companies come in there, and Bob Cook, who's a correspondent who's with the battalion the whole time, takes this shot of some of these fellows looking back toward the beach. We can see how far away that first terrace is away from the beach. And you mentioned the tanks. So Larry Snowden, Captain Snowden, gets ashore just a few minutes after Charlie Hearn does. And it doesn't take long once they go over the top and they hit this thing and they find they're not going any further because of tremendous fire. So they call back to Bob Davidson, who calls up to Colonel Winsinger and says, it's time to get the band back together. Tanks ashore. And so that's Major Bob Neiman's company, C Company 4 Tank Battalion, whom these fellows know very well, and they've trained a lot. And he's coming in 2 LSMs. His LSM with his headquarters platoon and another one coming right in behind Fox Company. So Fox Company guys, Larry Snowden and his runner, Eddie Davis, they're watching. They see the Japanese trailing them in with mortar fire the whole way. And as soon as that thing touches the bow, or touch a shore. And Neiman drives his tank off. It was named Ill Wind, and it ground to a halt immediately. And they struggled for quite a while. There's a difference in recollection and reporting about just how long, but they couldn't get it freed. And that's it. Over there in the right corner, we can still see it. So we know it's there. And I know when that LSM in the background was ashore. So that tells me a time frame when this photos were taken.
And all the while that LSM's getting plastered.
A lot of fire coming in there. And the one that
It's a magnet.
sure it is. And Neiman's LSM took quite a bit of fire, but then casualties are helping themselves aboard, and some of them are amputees, and they're in shock. And then, so these guys have to make several runs out to the hospital ships and the LSTs and come back in to try to search for another place to land. So to your point, they try for, it's 4 hours before Neiman can get his tanks ashore, and they can never get to ashore at Yellow Beach 2. They have to go at Yellow 1. And throughout the day, they never can get to 2nd Battalion and Fox Company or Easy. Just can't do it. So somewhere in the late morning and then closer to midday, the Japanese opened up with their plunging fire of all manner. And Bob Cook took this photograph. That's Al Clark from Spartanburg, South Carolina, looking at us there from Headquarters Company. And this occupied a couple hours at least of their day, staying down. And I told a story out there in Texas of the company gunny, Harold Douglas, who said at one point a machine gun had him pinned down. He said, I had to lay there for probably 2 hours before I could move. And he never knew what changed that fire. Maybe it was Darrell Cole over in 1st Battalion, during the action that got him the Medal of Honor. But something affected that fire eventually. Marines just doing what Marines do. And
He's lucky they didn't hit him with indirect fire while he was laying there.
Just luck of the draw. That's exactly right. And he was able finally then to move. And at one point he said that he ended up in a shell hole with Captain Snowden at the time, and the two of them just lay there looking at each other. And Eddie Davis described the din, the sound of everything in the world. And it was just the luck of the draw whether something was going to land in that shell hole with you or not. And they had to wait it out. This is for hours. But they finally maneuver to the right to get around some of those pillboxes, really more as individuals or pairs. And guys start arriving in some numbers up at the airfield at the end of the day. And by the end of the business day, you might say 5 o'clock, 1700, you've got most of the company up there, enough to say Fox Company has arrived at the airfield. And some guys are still lying back there in no man's land. But I would point it out to you just in this map without any emplacements there. If you look at the gunnery maps, there's not much there in the gunnery maps because it's a bullseye.
Yeah.
It is a killing zone, and it was done so intentionally. So at the end of the day, the gains look more like this. You've made it to the airfield, and the 5th Marine Division has cut off Suribachi. But that's what they gained at the end of the day. And the battalion, 2nd Battalion, 23rd Marines, has lost about 30%, suffered about 30% casualties.
In a single day.
In a single day. So.
And this forces a reorganization of
does.
the company, right?
Eventually, a few days later, they get some replacements who came in, who have never trained with them before. They're assigned alphabetically. And like Stewart and Sims, those names are together. They come ashore. They just run into a guy who comes up to them. And his name is Irby Hip, the fellow I first called. He said, what do you guys know about a machine gun? And Stewart said, well, I've seen one fired before. He said, you're carrying ammunition for me, And some guys show up with a carbine, and whoever it was met them, said, pick up a BAR, find one. And they were lying everywhere. And so now you've tried to fill in most or much of that 30% loss that you've had, mostly in your rifle companies. So when we say battalion landing team, well, it's mostly in your rifle squads where you've lost those, mostly. Although all that fire was indiscriminate, hit everybody. On D-Day, it's interesting that the majority, the machine gunners suffered a inordinate number of casualties on D-Day. And I would surmise it's because they were trying to stay together instead of spread out. Also, you're carrying heavy weapons.
Yep. Yeah, they're singled out for for special attention. Let's put it that way.
Certainly,
I mean,
certainly. I don't,
when you look at a rifle squad and a rifle platoon, your machine guns are your biggest source of firepower. They allow you to set up your lanes for assaults, where they interlock their fire on the target and allow the infantrymen to get up there within rifle, bayonet, and grenade range to destroy the enemy at close range. So your machine guns are highly important, and are also highly important in the defense because they're the strongest amount of firepower that a small unit has. And it's interesting that you made the comment when Irby tells them to ditch their carbines and get a BAR. Generally, folks who look at a lot of pictures of this stuff, and most of my listeners will probably know already, the carbine lacked stopping power. And generally, when you see a Marine on EWO with a carbine, he's probably in a headquarters element.
Mm.
The majority of the riflemen only have your M1 Garand, which had no problem with stopping power, nor did the
Very much.
BAR. So, and nothing. It was interesting to read about like how valuable the BAR was, and then when they decided to the U.S. Armed Forces decided to divest themselves of the BAR, they never properly found a replacement for it. They tried the M14 as an automatic platform. It just didn't meet the same. It didn't perform at the same levels as the BAR. So they never really got to the point. And nowadays we use the SAW, and the SAW to me is very underpowered because it's a 5.56 caliber weapon, where the BAR was your 30 caliber. And that was the other thing. You had the commonality ammunition. You could pass it between, in a pinch, you could strip ammunition belts from your 30 caliber machine guns and then hand it out to your riflemen and your BAR gunners, and they'd be able to, reload. So, and I think they tried to do that with the SAW nowadays. But anyway, to your comment about the carbines, every time I see the pictures, I'm going, it's either a headquarters section or some Marines that had lost their weapons somewhere, and that was the only one they could find.
For some reason, I know some corporals who carry the thing, and
Well, you'll
some
see it with
corporals.
section leaders, especially for machine guns or your bazooka teams will carry the carbines as a backup weapon if they didn't have a 45.
Yeah, I don't know why Don Glover in second platoon, uh, tough hombre, but for some reason he carried a carbine up there. I don't know why. I never asked him. Yeah, he did. But the
Personal choice.
BAR, to your point, now it fires from the open bolt, and everything's so dusty on Iwo Jima and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. You had to contend with that all the time. They would always point out in your utility jacket there's that little pin pocket which held a toothbrush,
Yeah.
and it wasn't for your teeth.
No.
And they kept that thing working a lot. And also, some of the guys ran into an issue where the spring would lose tension on BAR and not fire. And certainly on the night of the 7th of March, when Fox Company was strung out to the left of the battalion, this is not written up anywhere except Black Dragon. I had to sort this out, but they're essentially covering a gap by fire between the 9th Marines on the left. And Dale Cook is out there, and another fellow he never named, and they both had BARs. The other fellow's BAR failed him for that very reason, and he cracked up that night and had to be escorted off the battlefield. But that happened several times, and I know several instances of that. That said, BAR was just a beast out there on the battlefield, and you got that in the center of a fire team with 3 M1s. That's a lot of firepower.
Heck yeah. I used to keep in touch before he passed away. David Hackworth very famously wrote about face, and Dave told me that in Korea, like their gunners, the ones that were really adept with their weapon, could cut grass with it. Again, we never really found a proper replacement for it, even with the SAW. Just it's in my mind, it's one of those legendary weapons that the U.S. military did right, like the M79 grenade launcher, the BAR. Like we've never adequately replaced it. But anyway, we're kind of jumping ship a little bit on your
No,
talk.
that's good, because that's all what gets into the where the rubber meets the road up in northern Iwo Jima, and I'll talk about that if you want just a little bit and how this actually worked, because this is where you really find out what team's made up. And as far as that BAR is concerned, for example, the first thing the guys would tell you, first thing you did was accidentally lose that bipod because that was too heavy and you didn't want it. And
you couldn't get low enough to the ground.
Yep. And so get rid of that thing. And some fellows would saw off the end of a baseball bat if they had one and screw that to the foregrip. So now
Give you a
you've got a
hand.
pistol grip. Helped a great deal. But it was tremendous. Now I'm gonna have to go back and restart the slideshow here. So bear with me.
No
just a
worries.
moment.
And I hope everybody's enjoying the talk so far. I mean, again, Stephen's a master of this information, and it's just great to have him on here, walk us
Well,
through all of this stuff, especially to talk about these great heroes from Fox Company, and the Second Battalion.
thanks, Joe. Appreciate it. Here's something that will surprise a lot of folks, probably. Let me think about it. One, two. Fox Company was in the assault 5 days on Iwo Jima. After D-Day, when you've suffered 30% losses, et cetera, now you're going to Corps Reserve, and they're using other battalions and regiments who were in the reserve, and they're trying to fight their way up to that second airfield, and now assaulting Hill 382 in the center and the famous area called the Meat Grinder Division.
Yeah.
So the second time that 2nd Battalion, 23rd goes into the assault is on the 28th of February, and they are actually attacking across the backside of the amphitheater, in between it and Hill 382, across this open moonscape filled with craters and a couple knocked out tanks and a ridgeline on the far line. And when they attacked that morning, they've got the support of their mortars and all that kind of stuff, but destroyers putting fire in front of them. And as soon as that fire lifted, the gunners, Japanese gunners in that ridgeline opened up on them. Blind fire. You never knew where it was coming from. And they got run right back out of that field. Back into reserve. That's the 20th of February. Now, the 6th of March was going to initiate the big push into northern Iwo Jima after a day's rest on the 5th of March. Reorganization, rest, and all that kind of stuff, except for the tankers and engineers. They're up there trying to clear paths, trying to get some way for the tank infantry team to get together, because it's just still not a reality on Iwo Jima in that terrain. So the 6th of March is the next time when 2nd Battalion is finally committed. Why? Because 1st and 3rd Battalions are done.
Yep. Combat ineffective by this point.
Yeah, they are cooked, especially 1st Battalion. So 3rd Battalion is going to work in support, and that's Bob Shelton, who's Skelton, excuse me. Bob Davidson's got 2nd Battalion, Skelton Shales, or Jim Shales, or Scales, has got, I keep messing that up, Shelton Scales, has got 3rd Battalion. And he's going to support Bob with his guys. But this is all now in northern Iwo Jima, with the 5th Marine Division pushing up on the left, 3rd Marine Division, 2 of its regiments ashore, pushing up to the center, and 4th Marine Division still swinging around to the right. I talk a little bit about the terrain here, Joe, because this is key. Now we're getting into what you would call the high ground of Iwo Jima, up in the center of the port chop of Iwo Jima. Not high, 382 feet. Remember, the airfield on the first day is 200. Not much of a hill. The guys just referred to it as Radar Hill. They didn't know it was called Hill 382, couldn't care, but they could see the radar up on top, what was left of it. But you got to get up there, because from the center of that port chop, the terrain breaks outward into these broken troughs, corridors that run outward toward the ocean. And the Marines are attacking headlong into this against the grain, which is a real problem.
And it's undulating too, which provides plenty of places for Japanese defenders to hide.
Very much. So they know if they can get to the center, they can now begin to fan outward and fight with the grain down those corridors and actually work together. My old friend, General Fred Haynes, who was in the 28th Marines, went up in a plane. He could see this terrain, and he discussed that coming back down. This is what we needed to do. That's what they're trying to do on the 6th of March. And 2nd Battalion now is going to be attacking on the far left of the 4th Marine Division, and they're launching the main attack for the division as it's swinging around like a door on a hinge. And to their left is the 9th Marines and some of the 21st being interchanged. Colonel Bob Cushman, later you know about Cushman's pocket. They're on the left, and 2nd Battalion is on the far left, and going to swing around into the terrain that looks like this. We're looking across one of the corridors into what I call the rock jungles. Those rocks being the size of small houses. And
Now try picking out a barrel of a machine gun out of that.
Oh, it's just impossible. And the mortars and rockets are all in there, as well as machine guns. And this terrain, though we say it's open terrain, it's not passable terrain. except by foot persons. Tanks can't get through there, and everything's covered. And it's mined and covered by anti-tank weapons and machine guns, and that's just a mess. And so what I've talked about at some length out in Texas was who can get in there. Let's finish this thing up. There we go. We talked about the rifle company. You know, when Larry Snowden landed at Iwo Jima, he had 234 Marines in his rifle company. You got 3 rifle platoons, machine guns platoon, and mortar section, and all that kind of stuff. But we talked about the reorganization, the 4-man fire team built around the BAR. You put 3 of those together, you got a rifle squad led by a sergeant. Put 3 of those together, you got your platoon with a command group. But you can't fit a platoon in that terrain. You can't fit a squad in that terrain.
Yep.
So platoon sergeant Sam Haddad has talked about this. He did, I never, on Iwo Jima, never moved a squad. There wasn't enough room. You couldn't do it. So every morning at jump off, the small groups would form. The fracturing would begin in groups of 2 or 3. And only groups of that size could work their way into those rock jungles. And for the most part, photographers didn't go in there either. These are maybe some of the outskirts of some of that terrain.
Yeah, it was probably the exception to the rule there.
Very much.
And for the folks who are listening, you know, the thing is, when you start breaking them down to those fire teams, they're not mutually supporting anymore. The terrain is restricting their ability to support each other. So again, like Sam had talked about, you can't mass the firepower of his platoon because of the nature of the terrain. So it becomes a very isolated fight for those individual fire teams.
And exactly right. Now, mousetrapping. The commander of the 23rd Marines, Walt Winsinger, when they wrote up their report on this, and you can see this BAR in there, for those watching, the Japanese put their weapons in those rock jungles, as I'm calling them, big jumbled mess, and you had no choice but to go find them. That's why you're there, is to hunt out and destroy those enemy positions and weapons and defenders. So you've got to put your infantry in there in small groups. And in that terrain, you've got to snake through there really in single file. You can't see each other. In some cases, you know, at jump off, a Marine said, I could see the heel of a boot of my fellow Marine over there. And when it moved, I knew it was time to move. And that's it. So the Japanese would draw these Marines into these corridors and cross compartments, the small pockets. They have machine guns set up in blind positions. They'd pin them down with machine gun fire and then call in mortar fire on top of them. Now, remember, what were our lessons learned from Saipan? They never concentrated their fire. They didn't coordinate fires. On Iwo Jima, that is not the case. And in some cases, they said in some cases, the Japanese may have lost their direct observation. What we began to see was that they would fire green mortar fires over a position, and then the heavy mortars would concentrate on that green smoke. So their coordination, this was a battle for coordination between the Japanese and Americans. The Japanese undid the A-team for the Marines, coming in there with their tank infantry team, their rocket Jeep, which got destroyed before it fired a shot, their 37s, their 81 millimeters, all that stuff ineffective and knocked out on D-Day. For the most part, these assault teams. And never were they able to get the tank infantry team together until very late on Iwo Jima on one day that I point out. So the Japanese did an extraordinary job of working as one with the island itself to hold the Marines down, to mousetrap them, immobilize them. The Japanese had all the advantage of observation and concealment. The Marines had none of those things. Nothing working for them. They just simply had to go in there as small teams and root out the enemy. And mousetrapping is what the Japanese did about that. So it was a brutal fight, especially for the 6th, 7th, and 8th of March for the 2nd Battalion, 23rd. And that evening after the 8th of March is when the Japanese came out of their caves and launched a counterattack, finally. It was the first time that had happened. And now I would also point out, Joe, what did the Japanese do on the beach at Iwo Jima? mouse trapping,
Hmm.
but it was a sticky trap instead of this other kind. So they let the beach, that sand and that terrain of Iwo Jima, let all the Marines come in there and get stuck in place, and then did the same thing, pin them down with machine gun fire, and then hammer them with plunging fire.
Yeah, like you said, is a masterful use of terrain and masking and concealment to provide themselves a tactical advantage.
But that's right. The Marines had just never seen that before. So, what are you going to do about it? Well, this is where we get into really the personal leadership elements, and I'm going to jump ahead.
Yeah, we've been going for quite a while, and I don't want to bog you down for the whole day, so we'll just we'll do
get
this.
it.
And I
Did
know
I
you
pick the
wanted to
right
talk
thing?
about Jane and Bill. Is
If
that
you'd like me
correct?
to. If you'd
Yeah,
like me
I
to.
think that's a brilliant story.
Okay, have I got you? Yeah.
Yep.
I want to talk a little bit. Here's where Sam Haddad came in. He took over 2nd Platoon. And we talked about what created action up there in Iwo Jima. This is, it wasn't superior firepower or American technology or numbers or any of that other stuff. In fact, on the 6th of March, when the 4th Marine Division went into the attack on that day, the division combat efficiency, they listed at 45%.
Man,
That's
that's ridiculous.
This is where you're starting this big push. Now, down in the rifle company level, and you've got a great number of brand new Marines replacements. So you don't have what you and I would define as teams per se. You got a lot of new employees who don't know how the team functions.
Yeah.
And they lack that implicit trust in each other. They know this guy's trained. He's a Marine, just like Easy Company when they're talking about the replacements they got. He's a paratrooper. He's going to be trained, but that's about all you know.
But he's not been integrated into the team itself and has not practiced with them, and he doesn't know tendencies. So it makes it very difficult.
Those things are where the right thing happens the right way at the right time. That suffers now. And so guys like Sam Haddad, who takes over 2nd Platoon, gets a field commission. He's spending more time managing individuals, playing mother hen, than leading the team. So his ability to lead the team with coordination and mission command, as we talk about, desired end state and commander's intent, suffers because he's bogged down by managing folks. But here's where it gets done. And he said every night when we dug in, I would crawl on my hands and knees so I didn't get killed. Crawl on my hands and knees to each of these holes and talk to these guys, especially the replacements, and assure them, his words, assure them that we are all here and not going anywhere, because they couldn't see each other. So, and they're together, by the way. You never put one Marine in a hole, right? You've got two together. But assure them we're all here, we're not going anywhere. Stay in your hole. Anyone above the ground or above ground is the enemy.
It's the enemy. Yep.
So stay in your hole. And then he would talk about what was going on tomorrow. But his first thing when he got to those foxholes was to check on them and just talk to them. And all the guys, Jack Sims, all of them say, he'd be standing there and say, Jack Sims. Jack Sims was a former Associated Press bureau chief. Jack Sims came in 1974 and established the Department of Journalism at Auburn University. Jack Sims did not play. And Jack Sims said, Sam Haddad would come up there and bullets are hitting the ground around his feet. And he's going, oh, you guys have got a really nice field of fire here. I said, you knew he had to be scared like the rest of us, but you never had any clue that he was. And he never spoke above that very low conversational voice. And this is what he took to those foxholes at night.
And because he had been such a long-standing member of the company, his words have weight.
Absolutely.
Highly respected, been there almost since day one.
You bet.
That kind of leadership is not something that could get taught.
That's Sam. And when the Japanese launched the big counterattack against 2nd Battalion, and the records, by the way, gloss some things over for reasons that I have in my head, but don't write. Don't know why they did it, but anyway, they'll say, Easy Company got hit and suffered this many, and there were this many enemy dead in front of them, and G Company and so forth. And as far as Fox Company, well, some Japanese came up from behind them and hit the battalion. but we know differently. And we know that Sam's little platoon of about 22 Marines was strung across this corridor that leads to Tacha Iwa Point. And he said very clearly, we started contacting the enemy about 1,000 yards out, and they came at us in 3 waves, and they did not break through his platoon, did not get past his replacements, and those replacements stayed put and did their fighting. And I know why, and we call it personal leadership. And
Yep.
this is what was holding it together in those rocks up there in that part of the Black Dragon of Iwo Jima. It was that personal leadership getting things done up there. And you know, Captain Snowden, later general, when he read the book, read the rough draft, he was appalled because he was evacuated twice and evacuated the second time. He didn't know this took place up there, what Sam did, what Doc Bankin did, and that they didn't get more recognition or awards for what they did. Just he was nauseated by that, but he didn't know. And that's the nature of Iwo Jima. And these are the fellows, we don't get to see them. We don't get to look into those rocks with these guys. Fortunately, over time, it sort of came together, and you can see it from other discussions of the other Marines and discussions with Sam, and see what actually took place up there. So, with all the casualties and the losses and the addition of replacements, inexperienced replacements, and no benefit from higher level assets, these guys are in there grinding it out. And
Yep.
this is what really made the difference up there. And I want to
Yep.
point this out. I showed this slide out there in Texas. We can see the numbers, the X's and O's of the Fox Company's casualties that day. But what I really want to point out always is you've lost some significant leadership,
Yeah.
especially in the corporals. And you've got 18 fire teams in the attack that day, 2 platoons. You've lost 16 of your corporals just on this one day.
That's what we talked about, those PFCs and those privates taking charge of those fire teams and executing the mission. It's funny you discussed it the way you talked about the operational reporting, and Marine Corps reporting. Operational reporting tends to be quite antiseptic at times, and that's where the brilliance of your writing really fills into that gap and talks about these, like Sam's inspirational leadership at the bayonet point with his 22 Marines, you know, and I don't recall how many Japanese attacked that night, but 3 waves over 1,000 feet of ground coming at you. And again, with replacements, a lot of them had never seen a bullet fired in anger at them, and
No.
and held their ground and inflicted tremendous casualties on the enemy, and the line never broke. And that is probably the most impressive part of their performance and Sam's leadership. To me, again, I love reading about him again so early in the book, and you get to your view of him evolves with his performance and stature within the company. You're allowed to evolve with him through the narrative, and guys like him. Just again, as we talked about when we were messaging before yesterday, when we were messaging yesterday about how important it is to discuss these Marines. It's more than just seeing that blue arrow with 2 F-23 on it. To know the sacrifice and to know the amazing performance by these young Americans, and yeah, like he's just tremendous all the way through the book. His leadership, I've known some pretty inspirational leaders over my course of my career, and he's pretty amazing to read about.
Well, you certainly know that I agree with that.
Without a doubt.
He was one of those characters who, let's put it this way, at reunions, I recall sitting in a room, again, a family reunion environment, a lot of chatter, the women are chattering, the men are chattering, and so forth, and I'm doing something, but I hear behind me, I hear the door open, and the level just settles down. I didn't have to look. Sam's here. And he didn't command that. He would come walking in with his cane at that time with diabetes, whatever. He could sit in the corner and just talk like at this level for an hour and no one would say a word, just sit and listen to him. He did not demand that. It was not his style but it was Sam. And When I first met him in '97, I knew who it was immediately. Okay, there's Haddad, and I had to take my time working my way over there. At the right time at the cookout, we had a low country boil in Savannah, Georgia, and out at the picnic table out back at Ace Lambert's house, and Sam was sitting there, and we'd all eaten, and I ended up at the table with him, and off we went. And he was just, and we became very close friends. But he was one of those fellows who you see early in the book, he won't take any nonsense, even from Lieutenant Colonel Dillon. He never would. On the night of the 7th on Iwo Jima, and he has his platoon in reserve. They're going on the line the next morning. Well, they bring up donuts that night. They start making donuts, bringing them up to the guys on the line. Well, he's told his guys aren't on the line. He says, we're supposed to go up in the morning. What do you mean we're not on the line? Well, but you're not on the line now. You don't get donuts. He said, we don't get donuts now. You tell those SOBs we're not going up in the morning. So he got donuts for his Marine. And later in life, he worked for 2 presidents in labor relations in Central America and other places. It's just who he was and what he did, looking out for his troops and his people, and utmost respect for the folks under within his responsibility, I guess, is the way to say that.
Yeah.
Now you wanted to talk a little bit about Jane Kendi.
Yeah, I think this is an amazing story, and I think our listeners and viewers are going to absolutely fall in love with this.
Well, I'll do a quick version. I've jumped ahead a little bit here because I will tell you I'm doing a video and sponsored by the National Museum of the Pacific War, something of a documentary on Jane and Bill Wyckoff. So that covers things in detail. That's the deep dive. This is the skim the surface thing. But
the teaser for everybody, right? So they'll keep following along.
So the morning of the 6th of March, that big push right in the northern Iwo Jima, this is Fox Companies. There's Haddad in the back, obviously.
Yep.
And a bunch of the NCOs, and kneeling at second from right is Sergeant Bill Wyckoff in 1st Platoon. Big personality, great fellow, highly respected. And as soon as that attack jumps off, he says, follow me, and an explosion goes off, and down he goes. His corporal runs out to Leroy Surface and pulls him back. Leroy Surface had been a bazooka man and knocked out he got credit for 2.5 tanks on the first night on Tinian as a bazooka fellow. But he runs out, pulls him off the battlefield, and Bill says, how much my arm is left? He said, no, it's all here. You're good. But he was blinded in extreme pain, and Doc Bankin bandages him up, and this is Bill being carried through the CP. And Sergeant Bud Gavigan, smoking a cigarette there, looking down, standing up, facing us, looked over and mouthed to one of the guys, who was that? And they said, it's Wyckoff. And so when Bob Cook, who took this photograph, he gave Gavigan a copy of it, and Gavigan sent it to Wyckoff, which is how we follow the trail to say, okay, we've got enough evidence here. That's who that is. Well, he gets through the battalion aid station, where they take a lot of shrapnel out of his eyes, back by hospital jeep to the division hospital. They do some more bandaging of him, working him up, and usher him across the number 1 airfield to the newly established air evacuation tent. And he's one of the first carried out there. And I'm talking within the first half hour of being wounded. It's exceptional what was being done by the Marines and the Navy there in Iwo Jima. And as he's lying there, hearing artillery still firing and in exceptional pain, then suddenly, a few minutes later, he hears the voice of an angel. He couldn't believe it. Am I still in Iwo Jima? What is this? And felt the touch of a young lady whose name was Jane Kendi. She's a 22-year-old ensign and one of these new, highly trained Navy flight nurses who'd been moved out to Guam. And this is her first time in a combat zone. She landed that morning and became the first Navy flight nurse to land in an active combat zone. And it was on Iwo Jima the morning of the 6th of March, 1945. And there was a Navy photographer named Gil DeWitt who was sent with her, and he snapped this photograph, and she's talking with Wyckoff here. And this was printed all over the place in newspapers, magazines. The National Geographic, September 45, even has an article on this. So she became really quite a sensation and something of a celebrity. I'll run through some pictures here since they're in line here, Joe.
Yeah.
They staggered these flights from Guam by 30 minutes, intending them to be on the ground for 30 minutes. Why? So you don't overload the team on any one island. Lieutenant Burns, the pilot, that's him standing back there looking at us with sunglasses, I believe.
Yep.
But this is Jane's plane, and Bill's about to be carried aboard that plane as well, evacuated. Took about an hour for them to get off the island. They were delayed because of massive bombardment that morning to kick off this push by about a 90-minute delay. So by the time she lands, several of the other planes are already there as well. So you start stacking them up and they're waiting to be loaded. And there were a couple of the other flight nurses who were there that day, Gwen Jensen and Stella McCarr, who also became a chief nurse. That's Al Josephi, who was a combat correspondent who'd carried a recorder with him ashore at Guam in the assault. And he's on Iwo Jima doing the same thing with the Navy flight nurses during that period of time. But Jane treated these guys and got them all the way back to Guam, same day here. And these fellows, I always want to point out, they know that 8 other planes are coming right behind this one. They got to hustle. So these guys are getting screened, their bandages touched up, and they're getting ushered off in ambulances to fleet hospitals like Fleet Hospital 111. And they've got 9 of these cycles to go through that day. But the addition of their flight evacuations made a significant difference on operations at Iwo Jima. I just selected a few dates here. There's 171 that they evacuated that day on the first day of operations, really, 6th of March. But on the 11th of March, you look at 248, that's all 12 planes that this squadron has and all 12 flight nurses pulling that duty. So
amazing.
You can see the dip as they go along. Most of the casualties from Iwo Jima were treated and evacuated to many other vessels, troop transports especially. And the troop transports, the way the casualties worked, once you got them through the battalion aid station, through division or corps hospitals, they would be sent out to an LSTH, or evacuation control ship, LST. And they had a pontoon set up beside them, and they would assess each casualty. Were they in shock? If so, you get them aboard immediately. This guy has eye damage, damage to his eyes. Okay, send him to the USS Bayfield because the eye surgeon is there, and so forth. And they could expedite these guys in that way. 2 hospital ships working in tandem evacuated almost 4,400. And then midway, halfway through the campaign, you add in the air evacuation campaign. And these guys do a terrific job there. There were some days where you couldn't evacuate by ship because there were no ships, et cetera. So Jane gets sent back for a war bond tour and other conferences and interviews and so forth. But she went home, and the point that we made out there, she went home and had never met any of the Marines that she'd treated. Because she did this on Okinawa as well, intentionally landing as the first Navy flight nurse at Okinawa in April. But had never met anybody until 41 years later, in February 1986, at an Iwo Jima reunion where she and Bill Wyckoff were reunited there ashore, reunited there at Camp Pendleton. And so as you know, if you watch the full event there in Texas, this in 1986 was Saturday, the 22nd of February, when they were reunited. And on the 22nd of February, 2025, at the National Museum of the Pacific War, Bill Wyckoff Jr. and Jane's granddaughter, Julie, were where they met for the very first time, right there before our eyes. And unfortunately, I was up there. I had to try to hold it together, and I didn't do a very good job, but was eventually able to reemerge from that. But
no, it was brilliant. I loved watching it. It was it's one of those moments. I'm getting a little misty thinking about it, actually.
It is one of those moments. And what was funny, we came before the symposium started. I came out into the auditorium. Julie had not come out behind me yet. And I had a tap on the shoulder and turned around. And there's Bill looking at me. And I said, "Bill's good to see you. You guys can't meet yet. Go find a seat." That's how short our conversation. And he did. He turned around and went and sat down. So when I called him forward, that was the first time that they'd ever laid eyes on each other. Powerful, powerful moment. But you know, it's another one of those Fox Company stories. You know, it gets to be a small world. I'm going to jump through this if I can.
Well, I'd like
General Snowden, I'm not going to be able to.
Sorry, General. Apologies.
Yeah, it's a 10-minute talk or 5-minute talk, and I can't seem to advance past it. So let's pop out there and we'll do it this way. So one last thing I'd hit you with, Joe. This phrase here in the book. The first time I went to Iwo Jima, 2001. We had been on Saipan and Tinian and Guam and touring around. I had a great time. The veterans in the group, and it was a lot of fun. And the morning we got up to go to Iwo Jima, there were about 300 of us standing in the hotel lobby, and it was dead silent. And I knew that this was different. And what we came to understand was that these veterans, a great many of them, were afraid to see this thing again. And so in the book, when these guys finally sailed away from Iwo Jima, I say, some of them turned to have another look at the island as they sailed away, but some of them did not. But all of them had the sense that it was watching them escape over the horizon, and that for the rest of their lives, they've known it's still out there. And that's the meaning of Black Dragon, where it gets its title, is that this thing has stuck with them. So it's the experience of the Marines. It does focus on Iwo Jima, and we've renamed or given Iwo Jima another name, and that's the Black Dragon. That's the significance of that.
Well, this is it's been a tour de force, this discussion about Fox Company. I had told my wife, I've been so looking forward to this. We do so much with Western Europe on our pod, but it's always, as a Marine, it's always great to go back to my roots and discuss Marine stuff, because it always makes me swell up with pride to know that I got that same DNA. And I want to thank you for your beautiful handling of their story.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for coming on. But also, what's up next? I mean, I know you've got a bunch of stuff. I was able to kind of slip into your schedule to pull this off, which was great. But I know you've got a bunch of things coming up. Please feel free. Let me
Great.
let's I've already tooted your horn a lot. Let's talk about what's coming next. What do you got on the horizon?
If anybody's still with us after.
Oh, I have no doubt that everybody's still with us.
Well, we've got shortly headed to Normandy for another leadership program, which we do, Trident Leadership, and a great many of these lessons fall right in there. What are we talking about at Normandy? We're getting at these scenarios at Lafayette, saying what's creating action here. Okay, where's the coordination coming from?
Nice.
All this kind of stuff. Same stuff that we do in the PMEs for corporate groups and whatever it might be. And then this summer, the 80th anniversary of the end of the war is coming up. We're headed back out to the Central Pacific, to Marianas, for a commemoration there, and as a branch from Trident Leadership, Trident Expeditions, adding some tours back into that fold, you might say. But we're partnered with the National Museum of the Pacific War, you might say, or it's being done in cooperation with, working together to do that, do a tour that heads out from the West Coast through Hawaii and out to the Marianas, Saipan and Tinian. And that's, if last June is any indication, it's going to be quite an event once again. We had a terrific commemoration out there then. And I got to tell you, the Commanding General 4th Marine Division was out there as well. And he sent a squad of Marines from 2nd Battalion, 23rd.
Nice.
There
you go.
So that was outstanding. Look forward to doing that. And then also working with the Marines, working with the museum to do numerous things, including that documentary on Jane Kennedy. So keep your eyes out for that as well.
That'll be wonderful. I will post links for Black Dragon for everybody if they want to chase it down and get a copy of it. I highly recommend it. And also links for the National Museum of the Pacific War. They're doing some outstanding stuff there. And I highly recommend everybody stopping by and basically hitting up that live stream. They've posted it on YouTube, and you can catch Steve's full-length presentation with all those wonderful little moments in there baked into having the families of the Marines and Navy personnel that were involved in some capacity with the 2nd Battalion and Fox Company. For everyone out there, we are on Patreon. To subscribe, $3 a month gets you all kinds of access, papers, photographs, behind the scenes stuff, field reports. We are available on YouTube and Spotify, Amazon, Apple, anywhere you find your podcast. Thanks for following along. I know it's been a long show, but this has been dynamite, and I'm sure everybody's going to love it. And I look forward to catching up with you later on. Maybe we get Steven back at some point. He could do maybe come back and report on his travels. But
Well,
it's
I appreciate that. All kinds of stuff we can talk about. So,
oh
I
yeah.
want to do a better job of PR, Joe, make a terrible CEO. Go to tridentleadership.com if you want info on the tour.
There you go.
Tridentleadership.com. Yeah.
And we'll have that link set up with the pod description, so everybody can catch up with that if you want to take a tour with Steve. Obviously, a master of his information that he's imparted here, and I highly recommend it. Again, Black Dragon, wherever you can get it, Amazon or wherever. Again, we'll have the links posted up. Thanks again, Steve. I really appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure. Been an honor. Thanks.